Welcome back to the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian, and Hasan Piker joins us. So now that both Hasan and I are here, you are at serious risk of public disorder. So mayhem might break out at any second now. So we're both on Hasan's stream on Twitch and our show on YouTube and everywhere else. So Haas,
can I start off with something a little different? So we're gonna talk about Cenk and Hasan getting banned from the UK, but I see this as part of a broader campaign targeting you, Haas, because I don't like being put in a situation where I have to defend you. I'm just gonna keep it 100. But Dave Rubin went on a show and claimed that you harassed me and other women at work, which was a brazen lie. I went out and said that it was a brazen lie. You never once harassed me at work. What do you think this is about? And why do you think it's okay, or why do they think it's okay to just make up lies about you like that? I mean, like, sexual harassment is a serious allegation, and for Dave Rubin, who I haven't spoken to in over a decade, to speak on my behalf like that and make something up is insane.
Yeah, I think it's a campaign of misinformation and smearing prominent critics of Israel, no matter which way they can. And it's very obvious that they're getting increasingly more desperate. Now, with Dave Rubin, it's a unique predicament because on the one hand, I'm thinking like, is this a part of a broader sophisticated smear campaign? Or rather, is it simply just Dave Rubin being stupid? Because he's just so unbelievably stupid. So with Dave Rubin, you got to think about both of the options.
True.
But yeah, I do see a coordinated effort. Fox News is probably watching this broadcast right now. They have people stationed on my broadcast every single day. They just do like a transcript readout of every single thing that I talk about and post about it and publish it. On the other side, this is obviously escalated since the subpoena, which I never received, by the way. But Will Cain was talking about how like some counter protesters that were at the Delaney facility in New Jersey that I went to with Adam Hamawi, who's running for Congress in New Jersey, to check out the heinous conditions inside of the facility, and to hear from the protesters about the ways in which the state troopers in New Jersey and the federal ICE officers were actually brutalizing them for exercising their First Amendment rights. There were a lot of agitators, a lot of counter protesters that were pro-ICE and disruptors that were there specifically to yell at the protesters. They of course yelled at me as well. And Will Cain earlier today covered that as though it was actually the ICE protesters that were yelling at me. So I feel like there's this like effort to slander and smear prominent critics of Israel, prominent critics of the Trump administration, no matter which way they can. There's obviously a bipartisan effort in some respects. Josh Gottheimer earlier today also said I was because I called the Israel Day parade that took place that had Bezalel Smotrich on a Nazi parade. I said there's Nazis at this parade. It's a Nazi parade, and prominent Democrats like Chuck Schumer and Kathy Hochul were participating in a Nazi parade, and Josh Gottheimer didn't like that. And he was saying, I've defended Hamas, and therefore, maybe my read for who's a Nazi is broken. He's been ducking me. I've told him I'd be willing to have like regular discourse with him. But yeah, none of these guys want to actually entertain the conversation. They can't actually attack the message. They can't counter message, so they attack the messenger and disparage. That's all they know.
I mean,
but I think people are fed up with it.
They'll call you anti-Semitic, but they'll never call you wrong, right? They never engage with the substance of what you're saying. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Gottheimer's running away. If he sat down and engaged in a debate with you, I mean, what's the substance of his argument? You can't defend the indefensible. We all see what's happening in Gaza. We all see what's happening in Lebanon. We see the entire global economy being destroyed right now as we speak because of this war that the US got dragged into against Iran by Israel. So I just feel like, look, everything that's happening right now, they think it's gonna work. Like these bans, they think it's gonna work. The censorship, they think it's gonna work. Everyone sees what's going on, and in fact, everything they're doing is actually incredibly counterproductive to what they want to accomplish here.
Yeah. So Haas, to that point, how do you think that the rest of this plays out, right? And I don't mean about the UK, we'll come back to them in terms of whether we're ever allowed to go there again. I mean, it's hilarious. You were just there a little while ago, I was just there a little while ago. Mayhem didn't break out, the public order wasn't immediately destroyed, right? But like, so it feels like the powerful in the US and the UK and in a lot of Western countries, but not all of them, are starting to tighten their grip, and that they've lost the media wars, so they're just going to outright oppression. But now the overwhelming majority of British citizens and American citizens are on our side, not their side. So how does this movie end?
I mean, I think inevitably there's going to be too much public pressure, and once there's too much public pressure, governments like our government here in the United States and governments in the UK and far beyond in Europe as well, are gonna have to make a decision.
Quick question, when was the last time you went to bed before midnight without your phone lighting up your face? It turns out if you've got the news cycle on a loop in your head, it's harder to fall asleep. Here's what's actually happening. The stress, the screen time, the doom scrolling spiral, it raises your core body temperature, and a body that's too warm cannot get into deep sleep. You're not just tired because the news is exhausting, you're tired because your body never actually recovered. The good news is science has a real answer, and it's simpler than you think. Your bed temperature. Enter ChiliPad 2.0 by Sleep Me, the water-based mattress topper that actively controls your bed temperature from 55 to 115 degrees all night long. No new mattress, no renovation. It actively cools just using water. Fans only move hot air around. ChiliPad actually pulls heat away from your body, precise, consistent comfort, and the new nightstand remote senses when you get into bed and kicks on automatically. Dual zones mean you and your partner each set your own temperature, no subscriptions needed, you get a 2-year warranty, and they're designed and assembled in the USA. Look, I'm up late doom scrolling with the rest of you. Getting my sleep environment under control changed everything, so give it a try. Visit www.sleep.me/TYT to get up to $255 off your ChiliPad 2.0 with code TYT. That's www.sleep.me/TYT. Free shipping, free returns, and a 30-night trial so you can test it out, dream big, and wake up better. The headlines will still be there in the morning. You might as well wake up ready for them.
Do they want to drop all pretense that they have a democratic process, that they care about like liberal humanitarian values that they claim to espouse, they claim to care about, or are they going to increase the repression? And unfortunately, what a lot of people either don't understand or are moving in the direction of is exactly that. What did the UK do? They prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist organization, and then they started arresting en masse thousands of pensioners, disabled protesters, young people that would dare to say that they support Palestine Action.
Well, they're so dangerous. They're so dangerous. All those elderly people that they rounded up and arrested, so dangerous. And by the way, Haas, Cenk alluded to the fact that you were in the UK not that long ago. And I want to show everyone what you were talking about when you were in the UK not too long ago. Let's take a look at that.
Anti-Semitism is a canary in the coal mine of fascism. It's one of the oldest bigotries that has caused those of the Jewish faith a tremendous amount of pain. From pogroms to the Holocaust, Jews have always been singled out by those in power as a scapegoat for instability and economic volatility people in power cause. A resilient, nascent anti-Semitism is a constant threat, especially as economic instability makes those in power seek out old targets. They're not very creative, usually. They just always rehash the same propaganda over and over again. This is precisely the reason why I am terrified of the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The conflation is dangerous. Valid criticisms against the state, especially as all of the violence is unfolding, and everyone can see it. Valid criticisms against the state committing these atrocities and tying it back to Judaism is a cynical ploy to stop all matter of conversation is truly terrifying. And I think it directly causes anti-Semitism to fester.
And look, I agree with everything you said there, and I don't see the Zionist project as a project that seeks to protect the Jewish population. In fact, they couldn't care less about anti-Zionist Jews, and the treatment of anti-Zionist Jews makes that abundantly clear to me. I mean, look at the way they talk about people like Dave Smith, Glenn Greenwald, and others, and it's amazing to me that the people who are getting punished right now are those who have a problem with mass slaughter campaigns and land theft. It's insane. That's not really a question. I just wanted to make that statement.
Yeah, but I'm curious for Hans to finish his thought.
Yeah.
So now that the audience has seen, of course you didn't say anything anti-Semitic. In fact, you said the exact opposite. Literally the exact opposite, right? So, but how does this movie end? Because now our governments say, we don't care what you think. It doesn't matter. We're just gonna oppress you on behalf of Israel.
Yeah, I don't know. There's only two options out of this. Obviously, it's either de-escalation on behalf of the British government, on behalf of the American government, and we have seen some de-escalation on other issues from the American government, like in Minneapolis, where there was far too much public pressure through these people-backed campaigns of people going out and protesting against ICE activity. It was an occupation by the Trump administration, and there was some success there. So even the most powerful country on earth, the United States of America, was able to cave and capitulate to the demands by the public when it got far too heated, I guess. And of course, they ended up assassinating 2 American citizens in broad daylight in the process. I guess a similar thing could take place in the UK with this issue as long as the protests continue, because like I said, at the end of the day, they have to make a decision. Are they going to allow fascism to manifest, or are they going to maintain the pretense that democracy and the democratic process still works? Because it's gotten to a degree where the overwhelming majorities of masses in almost all of the Western countries have realized what's going on, and they can't really arrest every single person, right? So they might have the moneyed interest, they might have a pervasive, sophisticated influence peddling operation that they've utilized for decades. But we have the people, and the people are not. They're not giving in. As a matter of fact, this kind of additional state repression only angers the people further, and it actually causes people who were maybe on the sidelines, who might have seen the violence but never really thought about it all that much because it's just happening over there. Or maybe you're afraid of Muslims and think they might have deserved this kind of violence or whatever, to now second guess, to now actually become participants, because what people don't appreciate is being bullied. What people don't like is cancel culture. And Israel loves bullying people. Israel's envoys, Israel's most prominent defenders are some of the most annoying people you've ever encountered. So when they go on television and demand with maximum arrogance, with maximum hubris, unconditional support, and then they turn around and say, if you say no to that unconditional support, you're an enemy and you need to be deplatformed, you need to lose your job, you can't live in polite society anymore, you can't exist as a normal person. Well, then that causes a lot of people to get frustrated at Israel even more than they previously would have. I've even brought this example up with the UAE. There is no United Arab Emirates lobby in the United States of America. Sure, they directly, give money as little Israel to Donald Trump and whatnot. But ultimately, there isn't this like sophisticated media machine working at the behest of the United Arab Emirates that says like, oh, if you ever bring up Sudan, you're actually an Islamophobe, and therefore you need to be punished. You need to lose your job. But if that was the case, I think that a lot more Americans would be paying attention to what the United Arab Emirates is doing. And I think the Zionist lobby is suffering from its own success. For years and years, they went uncontested. It was unconditional. There was bipartisan support for Israel, and anyone that ever questioned that would be called an anti-Semite, and there was a lot of weight to that criticism. There was a lot of weight to that accusation. Now that's gone. And the reason why that's gone is because everyone understands that Israel is committing a genocide. And that genocide has caused people to look back at Israel's history, Israel's development, and Zionism as an ideology. And it's caused people to understand that perhaps they totally misunderstood the history of Israel for the longest time. And the toothpaste is out of the tube. So either governments that are controlled and have some sense of responsibility to the masses will turn around and say, all right, enough is enough. We have to cut ties with Israel. We have to restrain Israel. This coalition that we've designed can't continue. Or they're going to become just like Israel, as I said. They're going to turn into fascist countries.
I'm worried. I mean, things look very bleak. And you pointed to the event that took place in New York City over the weekend, and I want to kind of flesh that out a little bit for the audience in case they missed that story, because Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich was seen in New York City alongside Democrats. This is for the Israel Day parade over the weekend. Now, Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, he was facing all this backlash because he's the first mayor in 61 years who refused to attend the Israel Day parade. And I'm glad that he did refuse, considering the fact that there was a literal war criminal there. So let's take a look at this J Street post on X. They write, Bezalel Smotrich should be sanctioned by American political and Jewish communal leaders, not marching alongside them in the streets of New York City. Smotrich is the architect of the Israeli government's policies to ultimately annex the West Bank, said that it may be just and moral to starve 2 million Gaza residents, but no one in the world would let us. He is a supporter of Greater Israel. We all know what that is. Believes Palestinians aren't even real people or a people, and is someone who has played a huge role in annexing parts of the West Bank, forcing people, Palestinians namely, out of their homes. The International Criminal Court even has a warrant out for his arrest. Take a look at this headline: exclusive ICC prosecutor's office seeks arrest warrant for Israel Smotrich. He's marching alongside Chuck Schumer and a whole host of other Democrats at this parade over the same weekend that you and Cenk get banned from the UK because you speak out against these atrocities.
It's a flex. There's no other way to read it than it's a flex. They're flexing on us. They get to have tremendous power and tremendous influence over what Western countries do and can't do. And this is a product of that. There's no other way to read it as anything but a direct threat to what the American government or what the American public has to say. That's what I think is going on. It's about sending a message. That's why Bezalel Smotrich is there. And you brought up J Street, and I find that really funny because liberal Zionism is inherently contradictory. This is one of the things that people get very mad at me about, because I say liberal Zionism is like saying you're a liberal Nazi, because Zionism is racism, Zionism is Nazism.
I agree with you, yeah.
And a lot of people get very frustrated with this. And as a matter of fact, J Street's president has gotten very frustrated with this. He's had conversations about the sentiment with the Pod Johns over at Pod Save America. And this is a direct demonstration of that inherent contradiction, because there were a lot of statements that came in the aftermath of the news articles that came out about Bezalel Smotrich being at the Israel parade, and some people were trying to say, oh, he snuck in, or some people were claiming that no one knew he was going to be there, and it's it's the Israel parade. If you go to the Klan march, you're gonna have the Grand Wizard of the KKK at the Klan march. You can't turn around and be shocked and act all surprised that a member of the Israeli cabinet, the finance minister of the nation state that you're choosing to celebrate, appear at the actual celebration. Of course he's going to be there, right? So I think all of the ass covering that Kathy Hochul and even Alex Boris, which is very disappointing that he attended that as well. He's too young. He knows better, and his father knows better too. But all these people that are like, oh, I can't believe that the Nazi was at the Nazi parade are just trying to engage in this same liberal cognitive dissonance. The idea that liberal Zionism is in some ways different than the ultra Zionism demonstrated by Bezalel Smotrich. It's not. He's a part of the Israeli government. He is perhaps the purest expression of the Israeli state's violence against Palestinians. It's racism that it harbors against non-Jews and Jewish supremacy. Of course, he's going to be there. He was elected. And he has every right to be there if you're going to throw an Israel Day parade. You shouldn't throw an Israel Day parade, and you certainly shouldn't participate in the Israel parade if you don't want to be caught next to war criminals.
Yeah. So, Haas, I was going to ask you about labor and the Democrats. I'll come back to that. But there's something you said there that I'm curious about. So, look, you look back at Zionism, and I think you're totally right about one of the things that you said, where you said, now that all these atrocities has made us look back, and we were taught in America when I was growing up here that 1948 was the Arabs attacked the poor Israelis for no reason at all, and like the Israelis were the victims. Now you realize, no, it was ethnic cleansing. That's what the Nakba was. They drove out 750,000 Palestinians from their lands. They slaughtered them and killed them, and that's why people had to run. And so our media lied to us about that. They lied to us about 1967, where again, Israel attacked its neighbors. We were taught that they were attacked. It's just not true. Now people go, oh yeah. Well, of course we lied about that. So I understand all that background, no question about it. And so when you look back at it, should they have done this Zionism idea, which has ethnic cleansing built into it in order to be a settler colony? Now that seems hard to defend, certainly. Now Israel already exists. So if today Israel and the Palestinians made a deal and they had 2 states, assume for a second that that's remotely possible, and it was based on the 1967 borders, and they were both 2 independent, safe states, I would take that deal in a second, no matter how wrong Zionism was in the beginning. Would you take that deal, or do you think that's, since Zionism is wrong, it's unconscionable?
Oh, I personally think that it's just not up to me. I think that whatever is good for the Palestinians, like Palestinian statehood is good for the Palestinians. That's what they're trying to move towards. If that means that there is a 2-state deal with 1967 borders and Palestinians are happy with that, then who am I to tell them no? I say I'm a one-stater for the reasons that you just brought up, right? And there are some people who actually disagree with me on this as well. But the reason why I say I'm a one-stater is the same reason why Avi Shalom also eventually arrived at that same conclusion. And I believe so did Ilan Pappé. These are 2 very prominent new historians from Israel. They're Jewish. They uncovered a lot of the atrocities that took place during the Nakba and after the Nakba as well. Avi Shalom specifically about what the experience for Arab Jews was like moving to Israel and why they had to move to Israel, and then Ilan Pappé specifically about Plan Dalet. So their assessment is the same as mine. They look at 750,000 Jewish settlers that now illegally occupy both Eastern Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank that is currently occupied illegally by the Israeli state, to specifically design a non-contiguous Palestinian state. And the removal of 750,000 Jewish settlers from the occupied West Bank is virtually impossible. I don't think that they would ever do it. Israel had a very hard time removing settlers from the Sinai Peninsula at the time. And they had an even harder time removing only 7,000 Israeli Jewish settlers from the Gaza Strip when they pulled out of the Gaza Strip to like hermetically seal it and create the world's largest open air prison. They had to genuinely go there by force and remove people at gunpoint, right? 750,000 of the most rabid ultra Zionists are most likely never going to leave unless they have to leave because they have to live in a binational state or a single solitary secular state that now places non-Jews and Jews in the same civil court system. what I envision is what would look a lot like Reconstruction, but hopefully not a failure like Reconstruction inevitably was. What I predict in that situation would that there would still be violence, of course, in the initial stages, but most likely violence resembling the Klan violence that took place in the segregated American South. But that is my North Star. That's what I think is the best possible outcome here. That's the most moral outcome, which of course would still offer reparations to the Palestinians for stolen land and also death and destruction that befell them at the hands of Israel. And beyond the reparations, certainly a right to return to all 15 million Palestinians. So that's what I believe is just and moral, and that's what I will continue to advocate for. But if there is a 1967 boundary two-state with a standing military, not something that Yitzhak Rabin even was on board with. If you recall, a lot of Israelis will say he was a peacenik, he was a blowhard. Yitzhak Rabin was the head of security, internal security at the time when the first Intifada was taking place, and he was famous for demanding that the Israeli military break the bones of little children. They did this by the tens of thousands, little Palestinian kids whose hands were broken on purpose because stone throwing had become a symbol of the Palestinian resistance in the first Intifada. That guy always said that there would be a two-state, but the second state would never be a full state. It would be a reduced version of an actual state. And what that implies is that the Palestinians would never have full sovereignty. They would never have a standing military, for example. So that's the reason why I always look at the two-state solution as simply a continuation of what's actually taking place right now. A one-state that is an apartheid state, a one state that is dominating and occupying Gaza and also occupying the West Bank as well, and destroying Palestinian lives and livelihood in both of these territories, and dangling this fake two-state solution in front of liberal blowhards in the Western world to make it seem like there is actually a peaceable solution out, when it's just a continuation of the destruction of Palestinians with the final purpose of complete ethnic cleansing from their indigenous lands.
Yeah. And they're not going to stop there, as we've learned with what they're currently doing in Lebanon. And so this is a project that spans far beyond Palestinian territory, and it's not going to stop unless these so-called liberal democracies do something to stop it and stop enabling and emboldening the Israelis to do it.
Yeah, so I think last thing here. So I agree with you guys on a bunch of things, including at some point the dam's gonna break. I mean, so like people get offended that Haas called them Nazis or whatever, right? But wait a minute, the Knesset voted that Palestinians will never be free. The Israelis have said, even their theoretical peaceniks, that no, the Palestinians can never have a full state, right? Let alone, I don't mean all the peaceniks. There's a lot of good people like Gideon Levy, et cetera, in Israel, right? But any of the
anti-Zionists.
But the Zionists say no, the Palestinians will never be free. Presumably they'll always live in these open air camps, or can I say concentration camp? They are concentrated in a tiny area of Gaza. Netanyahu bragged that they've taken 70% of Gaza and they've stuffed 2.2 million people of what's left of the small portion of Gaza. I mean, what is that if it's not a camp where that is concentrated full of millions of people? So if you're offended by our words instead of what Israel has actually done, well, that shows moral weakness on your part.
Let me read some offensive words real quick. This is a statement from Bezalel Smotrich on Channel 14. This is one of his latest comments. In the West Bank, we are destroying more Palestinian family homes than they can build. We are demolishing residential buildings of 4, 5, and even 6 stories. Now there is much more destruction and demolition of Palestinian homes. I think those are the types of statements that people should be offended by.
Yeah, and we're gonna show later in the show, Ben Gvir talking about how they're gonna bomb the suburbs of Beirut and mass civilian casualties, and because that's what Israel does. And then we have, look, to me, the number one thing holding this damn together is American mainstream media. Because without the propaganda, this is not a close question. Why would anybody want to finance these sick atrocities? The American people are not anywhere near that evil. American media is that evil. They say you have to finance it, otherwise we'll ruin your life by calling you an anti-Semite. Anyway, so look, all this is clear. TYT.com/UK ban, which is just a little petition to say reverse the ban. That's fun. But Haas, the last question I wanted to ask you is, so you see Labor wrapping their arms, bear hugging Isaac Herzog, the head of the Israeli Air Force, and going, oh my God, these guys who committed a genocide are wonderful. Oh, but the guys opposed to a genocide are evil, right? And then here in America, as you guys are pointing out, the Democrats are like, oh yeah, I'll go to a parade with guy who committed a genocide, and in fact is one of the biggest advocates. If there was any justice in the world, would be the first guy up in the Nuremberg type of trials. And they go, yeah, that's legitimate, but Hasan campaigning with Abdullah al-Said, disqualifying and illegitimate, etc. So is there any hope left for the Democratic Party and the Labor Party, which appear to be the fake left in both of these countries? And if there is no hope, what do we do next?
So I don't think there's any hope left for the Labor Party, and that is entirely in the hands of the Jeremy Corbyn assassin himself, Keir Starmer. They deliberately destroyed the actual populist wing of their party, and they did it at the behest of Israel as well. Labor Friends of Israel was a huge part of the fake anti-Semitism smears and accusations that Jeremy Corbyn was inundated with, and Keir Starmer famously said, if you don't like what I'm doing, you can leave the party, and many people did. Where did they go? They went to the Green Party that is being led by Zach Polanski, who is a wonderful guy. He's an anti-Zionist. He's also Jewish. They attack him quite a bit because of his anti-Zionism, ironically enough. He has withstood some of the most heinous smears I've ever seen. British media can be very, very vicious, even far more vicious than the American media at times. And so there is an alternative there. With the Democratic Party, a lot of people get mad at me for saying this as well, but I see a very weak party. The party is not a real party, right? It's a coalition of different corporate interests and foreign lobbies at times. And by foreign lobbies, I just mean Israel. Let's be real. There isn't like a profound Estonian lobby that is dominating Democratic Party attitudes, if we're being real. But there is a real disconnect between those who are voting for the Democrats and what their demands are and what the Democrats are willing to concede to on those demands. And therefore, I see this as a wonderful opportunity in all of this weakness to force in as many responsive politicians in this insurgent Bernie-crat coalition that is forming all around the country. There are plenty of democratic socialists who are open socialists, and even those who aren't socialists but have similar interests and similar goals, similar policy goals, who are willing to be the fighters that will hopefully change American trajectory from the downward trajectory that we've been experiencing for the past couple of decades into a more positive one. People who aren't afraid to say, why do we have so much loyalty to the nation state of Israel when it's very clear that it's done a genocide, when it's very clear that it's an apartheid state? Why are we constantly waging wars with other countries and spending billions of dollars of tax revenue? We should instead take that money and spend it on ourselves, all this productive output that's being stolen from the average American. Things that actually Donald Trump lied about. And lied his way to the office twice, as a matter of fact. Isolationism, America first. These were important concepts that Trump advanced that he never really followed through on. But I do believe that there are those who are invested in following through on this. And as long as the Democrats don't, expel people like myself and the candidates that I work with in the primary system, as they've had a very hard time dealing with Democrats who are actively pushing the needle on these issues, I'm going to continue trying to win as much power for people who do abide by anti-Zionism and who want Medicare for all, who want to end America's endless militarism.
Yep. All right. So everybody check out Hasan's show on Twitch, but you could also see clips on YouTube. So check out his channel there as well. We've got a fun shirt up on shoptyt.com about how we were both banned in the UK. I guess we're outlaws and enemies of the crown, which is kind of badass. And by the way, Haas, I realized this today. We, I believe, are the only ones to have 2 family members banned by the United Kingdom. So hence the most dangerous family in the history of the British Empire is right here, okay? So I didn't think that we'd get that kind of, I don't know, in a sense, an accolade or an honor of some sort. And let me double down on what Haas said. Zach Polanski, head of the Green Party in the UK, is awesome. Make sure you check that out. And that's a really legitimate way to go in the United Kingdom. And here in America, the takeover of the Democratic Party, I don't believe in 2028 should even be that difficult. So most of the candidates are going to be pro-Israel and tell us how wonderful that country is. And you will find the candidates that are authentically in favor of American sovereignty instead of serving another country. And I think that we could do that in 28. And thanks, Haas. We appreciate it. And we'll see if we can ever go back to the UK, and maybe we'll do that speech at Oxford Union together anyway, because Oxford Union is trying to put that together, even if it's virtual. So that might even be later this week, so everybody can check that out. And when we come back later in the program, what we're gonna do next is how Israel's currently destroying the peace plan that we have by defying Donald Trump and bombing Lebanon. So Haas, thanks for joining us, really appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me, bye guys.
Yep, see you in Thanksgiving. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.